Hey everybody, welcome to Saturday Scares with Kyle. We've got a few minutes to discuss, I think, the first documentary we've done in this series, but it's not really a documentary and it's not really a mockumentary. It's kind of a faux doc with some real doc elements. It's talking Häxan, which is 102 years old. It's tied with Nosferatu for being the oldest film we've ever talked about. Yeah, subtitled Witchcraft Through the Ages, which was also the name of the 1969 recut of the film. Quick, little synopsis. It's a part doc, part faux documentary film that chronicles the early days of witchcraft up to present day 1922. This was a movie that's been on my watch list for years. I have always heard great things about Häxan, and I've always wanted to watch it, but just, it's one of those things. When are you going to get time for the 105-minute long fake documentary about witchcraft silent film? So I was really happy to get a chance to talk about it for this show. It's directed by Benjamin Christensen, who also wrote the screenplay. And yeah, he's the top-billed actor in the film, too, because he plays the devil. So if you've ever been on a rough film set and you thought this director is a complete devil, this one he actually was. We've also got a few other smaller performers throughout the film, and it's set up in 7 chapters, basically chronicling different aspects of witchcraft, and I like that it dives into a number of different places with it as well, including the actual history of witchcraft, as well as legends about witchcraft, the fantasy of witchcraft usage for the time, and also even just having some interesting psychoanalytical approaches of comparing it to potentially being related to mental health issues, hysteria and whatnot, that would have been something that we didn't have fully diagnosed back when the film came out, and definitely not back when witchcraft was being sought at. So it blends fact and fiction. There's some sequences here that everything for the film has been filmed, of course, because there was no cameras around during witchcraft times to get the actual footage. But what's really effective about the film is how Christensen makes you believe what you're watching is actual documented footage, which is really hard to do, especially, I feel, for the silent film era, because you have to conceivably not make things over the top. This is like, kind of a found footage or fake documentary before that was even a possibility. But it's convincing. You get through the film and you think you've seen something you're not supposed to see, which is, I think, one of the most incredible things you can possibly do. It's kind of like how, similarly, when I watch Nosferatu, I forget that I'm watching what is ostensibly a ripoff of Dracula. I think I'm actually seeing something truly haunting that I'm not allowed to see. And I think the more time you get distance with certain silent films, sometimes they become more comical, and sometimes their horror actually increases. And I think that's the case with this film and Nosferatu, is the longer they've been out, I think they've ebbed and flowed and become something far more disturbing because of the time that we have between where we were and where we are. There's also an interesting feminist lens to the film in that, and this has been seen in a number of witchcraft-related things, but considering this is 100 years ago when the movie was made, looking at it as though the men were scared of women and the power that women hold over men, and using that as kind of a way to gain power back from them. Again, it's not something we haven't seen with witchcraft before, but just knowing that this was an angle Christensen took 100 years ago is really fascinating for me, because those kinds of conversations weren't happening 100 years ago, and yet he was coming at it from a new and different perspective. I think he also does a really good job of tearing apart the fact and fiction elements of the film. He even references an actress who is in the movie during one of the intertitles and says, her name is Maren Peterson, and she said, I believe in the devil, he sits beside me on my bedside. And he actually references that in the film. He says one of our actresses actually believes that she sees the devil at night, which kind of, again, admits that what we're watching is fake and circles back around into it becoming fact. And I think that's what's most effective about the movie, is that it has consistently kind of broken down its own walls of reality and then given you something that you can appreciate fully. The film has been remastered 3 different times, and I would suggest if you haven't seen the film, get the Criterion Collection edition of the film, which is the 2016 version that has some slight tinting, but overall the film is completely, like, from the ground up, cleaned up footage. This movie looks incredible for its age, and the Criterion edition of the film has a number of re-changes, because when it was remastered in the 60s, they actually cut about a half hour out of the movie, and they changed up what the music was going to be for it, and I believe they added narration from William S. Burroughs to the 60s version of the movie, it's a really ludicrous cut of the movie.
All the people, right.
Now, don't get me wrong, I do want to watch that at some point, but I would say stick with the 20s version first that was recreated.
You're not going to get anything coherent from William.
Yeah, if the idea was to remove a half hour from the film and somehow complicate it, that's what you've got here. Which, you know what, that's a choice. The last thing I want to talk about with this movie, because I do think that, again, it's flabbergasting to think this movie is 100 years old, because what it does in the field of effects work is incredible. Seeing some of the things that take place in this movie that look better and more well done than movies that we're seeing decades later. Things like advances in puppetry on film, advances in the use of stop motion pioneering, advances in special effects makeup and the way that film characters look in that black and white tintedness as well. The superimposition of images. We have this like ghostly ethereal sequence in which the witches are flying on brooms, and it's very obvious from this filmmaker's kind of perspective that we're just shining images onto a wall. But again, having this done 100 years ago, having that kind of ingenuity taking place, and then even just simple things like reversing the film to have images moving in reverse to give that kind of uncanny quality. I'm in shock that that stuff works as well as it does in the 20s and still stays as fresh. So I think Häxan works in a number of different ways. It works as a fake documentary. It works as a mood piece because the music is ethereal and creepy, but also the images are as well. You could put this on TV during Halloween and give out candy when people walk by, and you're probably not missing anything too major when the doorbell rings. But at the same time, it's also a document of a time period and the document of just a peculiar time that films were still very much in their infancy, and yet it has transcended decades, or in this case a century, to still be as engaging now as it was then. So I really liked Häxan, and I got to give it one of my strongest recommendations on this show. So thank you for joining me for this breakdown of Häxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages from 1922. Go ahead and check out the film, and then come back and leave your thoughts on it down below. Next week, we're actually going to cover a real documentary, a super doc, as they've been called, a 3.5-hour look at folk horror with Kier-La Janice's Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched. So why don't you watch that 3+ hour film and then come back and listen to me talk about it for 5 minutes, okay? We'll see you next time.